recording. Oh, okay. Ah, I'm so mad. Don't want to do this. Okay. All right. Oh, guys, I want to chicken out of this already. Okay. All right. You know what's scarier than zombies, werewolves, and vampires? Reading your own material out loud. That's what I'm going to be doing today because I have been promising since like July that I was going to read my first chapter out loud on this channel. And I have been putting it off ever since because I am terrified and I don't read out loud well, so this will be good practice for me. And I think it's important for us to thicken up our skins and get good at reading our own material out loud, or at least presenting it in some way, so I'm gonna do it. Okay, keep in mind, this is my second draft, and I've not done line edits on this yet. In fact, all I did with the first chapter on the second draft is add a couple paragraphs. So, yeah. So, bear with me, this is my first chapter of my first book that I've ever written to completion. We're gonna dive right in before I chicken out. Okay, here we go. So chapter 1, The Wave. The captain's scowl deepened on his unshaven face as he stared off the port bow from behind the thick glass that encased the bridge. His sapphire eyes narrowed in apprehension as he ran his hand through his thick black hair and kneaded futilely at the tension that had settled at the base of his neck. On the horizon, above choppy gray waters, were black clouds dense enough to block out the setting sun. Lightning struck the sea beneath the massive thunderheads with disturbing frequency. All around him, the air felt charged with an ionized tinge that mixed with the scent of the salty ocean breeze. The nearby flashes were made that much more haunting by the amount of time between the light and the sound that followed. The lapse was almost imperceptible. To James, they sounded like warning shots being fired at his ship, not like sounds of nature at all. James Darling had only been put in charge of his family's largest fishing ship, the Roger's Joy, within the last year. His father had been forced to retire due to a broken hip and had passed on his command, reluctantly, to James. He hadn't wanted to get the position that way. He knew he was more than capable of doing the job because he'd been working on a ship since he was a kid and knew everything there was to know about the trade. Everything except how to be in charge of people, especially difficult people, and he had plenty of those on the ship. He pulled the old watch his grandfather had given him out of his red windbreaker pocket and flipped it open. He didn't register the time it said, but checking the time had not been his intent in pulling it out. It was more like a nervous habit at this point. What he did take note of was the small family photo framed in the underside of the lid. He clicked it shut deftly when he realized that the photo was what he had wanted to see, not the time. Right then, thoughts of his family were not comforting. They set him more on edge than he already was. That tiny picture, he knew, had the power to make him lose his nerve and turn the ship around right then and there if he'd let it. So he wouldn't let it. Now, as he looked out at the impending storm, his insecurities seemed to be whispered to him on the breeze outside. "This is a terrible decision," they hissed at him. He had seen many storms like this one, but in the past they had always been closer to shore, closer to help if needed. Here, with no land in view, there was no safety net. He knew that underestimating such distant clouds was foolish, and he was to blame for having them out there. He reprimanded himself for having volunteered his crew and their ship to their current mission, as if his father hadn't given him a hard enough time as it was. He had griped endlessly. "A storm is coming in, so if that kid wasn't dead already, he's as good as. Probably had some dumbass parents who weren't watching him. That's why he got lost in the first place. I don't feel bad for them one bit. And I don't want us wasting fuel and fishing time to volunteer for some pointless nonsense." James had only been able to satiate his father's insensitive apprehensions by explaining that a tax break was being awarded to those who volunteered and that it would be good publicity for their business. This managed to convince his father to let them go. James's real motive to volunteer their crew had come from the repeating phrase in his mind: "If it were one of my kids lost out there, I wouldn't give a crap if there was a storm or 1,000,000 gallons of fuel went to waste looking." As he thought over the risks involved in coming face to face with a storm of this size, he knew he hadn't given enough importance to it before they had set out, and he was painfully aware that this had been a mistake. He could hear a bit of conversation from the other side of the cabin. "This is stupid. There ain't no way in hell we're going to find this kid after a week." James's expression changed from worry to disdainful annoyance as he recognized the speaker. Ian, useless son of a bitch. He would have to do something about this particular shipmate's attitude. Bringing everyone down with his constant griping and contributing little to the ship skill-wise had become Ian's norm at this point. James knew he wouldn't be able to take it much longer. With a relentlessly heavy brow bone, stereotypical jock crew cut, and completely unwarranted confidence in every opinion he possessed, Ian was the sort of person who relied heavily on his athleticism and looks to get him through high school. And true to form, he had been unpleasantly surprised when these characteristics hadn't carried him through college. Eventually, he had dropped all attempts at charm and substituted arrogant, loudmouthed claims instead. James swore under his breath again. He wouldn't be able to do much about Ian. He was the son of his father's oldest friend and a complete charity case from the beginning. Firing this particular crew member would be even more unpleasant than keeping him around. So, Ian stayed. But in response to his abrasive personality, everyone on the ship had adopted a tendency to avoid him or dismiss any of his comments with a sarcastic eye roll. James recognized the next voice as his ebony-skinned co-captain, Simon. Simon M. Evans had always been a character, sharp in every category but tact. Burly as he was, from a distance, one might expect him to be intimidating. But with his dark, gentle eyes and almost constant, sarcastic, lopsided grin, it was impossible to be afraid of the man. With his humor and unrelenting positivity, he had managed to convince the ship's medic, Angela, to go out with him, despite her stolid insistence that she didn't date crew members. Well, so much for that. They were coming up on their 3-year anniversary and had not once allowed their relationship to interfere with their work. Before he could help it, one corner of James's mouth twisted upward into a wry smile. He had always been fond of Simon, but this next comment made James like him more than ever. In a voice drizzled with a teasing sardonic tone, Simon said, "Ian, why the hell else did you volunteer for this crew if it wasn't to be out here for the adventure of a storm? Just trying to get your ugly mug in the paper as a hero?" He clapped Ian on the shoulder, just a bit too hard for it to be an entirely friendly gesture. Ian brushed his hand away and twisted his face into a snarl that brought to mind an irate badger. "Well, no, not exactly. But I mean, are you fucking kidding me? With a storm coming in and it being the last search day we signed up for anyway, they're fixing to get us killed too. These parts killed more people than I can count." James couldn't help but think that Ian's counting skills may very well be limited to his fingers and toes. Regardless, there was some truth in what he said about this place. Ian continued on his belligerent rant. "What's one more lost boy at this point anyway? They shouldn't be sending anyone out here to look. They shouldn't be sending anyone out here to look. It ain't called the Devil's Triangle for nothing. It's bad juju." James fought to keep from flinching at the mention of the common nickname for this area. He didn't think of himself as a superstitious person, but no one could say that the Bermuda Triangle wasn't a scary place, especially for sailors. In the past, he had often found himself thinking of the Triangle as a great cognizant evil entity, and if it weren't content killing just those who were dumb enough to enter its waters, it concocted hurricanes to fling at their coast almost yearly. He could swear, if he didn't know better, that the great span of ocean had a sick and twisted mind of its own. He was brought out of his contemplation by the cabin door slamming and a wave of laughter from the others in the room. He gathered that Simon must have said some comical retort that had sent Ian off in a huff. He would have liked to have known what Simon had said, but oh well, too late. Simon joined James at the control panel and was silent for a minute before speaking. When he did speak, the The suppressed laughter in his voice was obvious. I'm sorry, I can't help giving him shit. I know you'll be the one who gets the complaint later since your pop's so fond of the SOB, but he begs for it with that attitude, you know? You don't need to tell me. I wanted to deck him at least 5 times in the last week. We're all just tired and getting irritable. Even the most reliable people are slipping up and getting snippy. We just need to suck it up for one more day and... The shudder that ran through the ship jarred everyone off balance, cutting the conversation short. The sporadic rocking of the ship had increased and the waves were slamming against the ship with greater force than they had only minutes earlier. The temperature in the cabin had been reduced by a chilling degree as a hissing draft seeped through the worn weather stripping on the door and windows. The windsock on the bow was dancing frantically and making loud cracking sounds with a menacing rhythm. Jesus, Simon said, catching his balance and bracing himself against the control panel in front of them. That moved in quick. James had had to do the same clumsy recovery of his balance and was straightening up again as he said, "Yeah, they do that, don't they? But it still always catches me off guard, too. I wish ships had shocks." He laughed awkwardly and knew he'd be better off leaving the jokes to Simon. A few seats away, 2 crew members were hunched over a screen on an instrument and tapping the glass of a needled gauge. After loosing a string of 4-letter expletives, the first man, Phil, said, "This thing's gotta be broken." "Has to be," Hank said in agreement. "We're out way too far in the water for it to be that shallow. Maybe if we were only a mile or 2 offshore, but not here." James hadn't had any time to worry about these comments before he was distracted by the next violent jolt of the ship. This time, the shudder sent someone's oversized plastic soda mug sliding off the dash to the floor. It bounced several times before coming to rest in one corner of the room. Fortunately, the lid had held fast. Blech. The people in the room caught themselves on anything and anyone in reach to regain their balance and avoid ending up like the mug. Now, the edge of the dark clouds were only a stone's throw away from the ship, and the wind had picked up to an icy gale. The tips of the pointed waves crowned over the railings, leaving drifts of foam on the deck in their wake. Below them, a low groaning came from the hull, in cadence with the waves. Right as James was thinking, this ship is too damn old to handle this kind of storm, his ears were struck with the near-panicked tone from Phil. The scrawny man with healing acne scars and dirty blonde hair raised his not-yet calloused hand in the direction of the clouds. He stuttered through his cry. What the hell is that?" As he scanned ahead where Phil was pointing, for a moment James didn't see what had made the crewman's face turn ghost white. He'd been paying attention to the massive thunderheads bearing down on them like giant muscle-bound monsters ready to swallow them whole at any moment. Then he looked at the ocean under the blackening sky. Then, as he looked at the ocean under the blackening sky, he knew before he had even formed the sentence that his order would do little good. James hollered into the intercom, "Emergency turn port!" If it weren't for the crew's rigorous training, they might have hesitated, but they jumped into action at the orders almost before the shout had faded. The ship began to turn painfully slow against the current and opposing waves. Rain tapped on the glass of the cabin like an unwanted guest trying to gain entrance. Grabbing the radio receiver that they used to call back into port, he started yammering the typical Mayday message for a ship in trouble at sea. That's what they now were. He tried to include their location, but as he said the longitude and latitude that showed on the screen to his right, he wondered if those numbers were even accurate. To the port side of the ship, a section of water, at least 500 feet long, and was calmer than the rest, and recoiling in on itself, snake-like and as if preparing to strike. As a ridge began to form, James knew what was about to happen. These had been heard of in the area. James had never seen one, but from his time surfing with Simon when they were younger, he knew how to spot a wave forming in the distance, and he could tell when it was going to be a big one. His eyes got wide and he whispered, "A rogue tidal wave." The image flashed vividly in his mind of his worn ship being swallowed by water, drowning himself and his crew, all because of his hubris. Realizing what the captain saw in the water, Simon said with controlled dread, "It's going to hit us broadside. We won't be able to turn in time, not with the waves fighting us." With a moment's glance at the two men by the echo sounder, James replied, "We can, if we drop the port anchor." "It would have to catch the bottom to work for a turn," Simon said, in his voice rising in urgency. "It won't work out here." "It will, just do it," James ordered. Soundlessly moving like a shark through the marine landscape, the ridge of an immense wave came closer to the ship. As it began to rise from the depths, it became a solid wall of water. The anchor caught somewhere far below them, and everyone was thrown sideways by the force of the ship as it swung left to face directly into the giant mass that was barreling towards them. James let out the breath that he had been holding. At least the wave was going to hit them head on now, and they might have a chance of not being rolled. But it was going to be rough. He only had the briefest instant to appreciate the miracle that of the anchor catching before he realized the mammoth wave was still growing. His heart jumped into his throat at the sight. Pushing the fear from his mind, he watched as the peak of the wave grew to the point where he had to look up to see the top. He gave one final order to the crew before it struck the ship and the lights went out. James clutched the intercom radio microphone in his white-knuckled hand and he screamed into it, "Everyone, hold on!" Okay, that's the end of my chapter 1. Well, that was painful because that is not easy. I am not good at reading out loud. Thank you for watching this. If you have made it to the end, I appreciate it. Please feel free to leave comments below. I know there's many things that need to be worked on, but if we could try to keep things semi-tactful, I'd appreciate it. But if you need to tear me a new one too, that's fine. That's okay too. Anyway, I'm not gonna take up any more of your time because this is already a long video. If you've hung in there, I appreciate it again. Thank you and have a great night.